Words have consequences. I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle now. And Bill, there is a controversy going on right now in the esports business, the professional gaming world, where a gamer who goes by the name Blitzchung, and I'll probably mess up his name here, but his actual name is Chung Eng-wai, who is based in Hong Kong, recently was participating in a tournament of a Blizzard game. Blizzard is the company that produces the game Hearthstone. And during an interview with a couple of personalities who I think are also employed by Blizzard, Chung Eng-wai, Blitzchung, ended his interview that was done wearing dark goggles and a gas mask by saying, "Liberate Hong Kong, revolution of our times." For his freedom of speech, Mr. Chung was deprived of his $10,000 in 2019 winnings by Blizzard and banned from participation in Blizzard tournaments for the next year. Bill, isn't it great to see that private businesses still are allowed to decide how they want to spend their money in this world?
It is. It is great. First of all, the reason it's great is because by allowing businesses to perform the way they want to perform, it literally is, it's their business. But the nice thing about that is it allows companies to show us what kind of people they are, what they're composed of, what their leadership standards are, what their morals are, and what their general opinion on life in general is. And so the thing I don't understand is how they can strip him of stuff that he's already won. That to me seems like a pretty decent lawsuit. But yes, I'm glad Blizzard came forward and said that we value our dollars above any possible sense of forget freedom, forget Hong Kong, forget all of it. The idea that if anybody says anything that is against our craven policy of kowtowing to dictators, then that person's going to be heavily punished. So the fun thing about this show and this whole idea is to try and get things down to foundational principles. And the foundational principles are these. This gamer has no freedom of speech. Freedom of speech, well, let me rephrase that. I got that exactly backwards. I beg your pardon. Let me try to rephrase that more appropriately. The freedom of speech that is inherent in every human being is not protected under the rules of and laws of the country from which this gamer has originated. And so to say that his right to free speech has been infringed, that is correct, but his right as a legally protected right isn't infringed because it never existed in the first place. And we take this so much for granted all the time that I think that's the first thing that needs to be said about this.
Well, it turns out, Bill, that Blizzard is owned, 5% of Blizzard anyway, is owned by a Chinese conglomerate called Tencent Holdings Limited. And Blizzard, by the way, for those of you who aren't in the gaming world, is a producer of some pretty well-known games. In Hearthstone, I was unfamiliar with before, but I've heard of Overwatch and World of Warcraft. You're much more into the gaming world. Can you give the non-gamers in our audience a sense of the import of this? Because they may just hear this and go, who cares what happens in the gaming world? What does it matter at all?
I am pleased to tell you, I'm certainly not going to get into my entire thesis, which is that the entire millennial generation and Gen Z is going into computer games to escape the progressivism of the modern world. But I can tell you that the gaming community is pretty irate about this. The one thing that you can say about young people and their internet is that is something they take very seriously. I think you could make a pretty compelling case. They take it about as seriously as we would take a threat to our food supply, because on many levels, that's essentially what it is for an entire generation. They don't like censorship, and they're not happy about this. And they're not angry at this guy. They're angry, and they're not even really angry at the Chinese. They're angry at Blizzard. And the reputation of gaming studios like Electronic Arts, Ubisoft, these guys, continues to just get walloped. I have never seen such. In fact, to the degree that this, I'm speaking in the widest generalities now, but to the degree that this generation has opinions about anything political, it's opinions about how companies and design studios, game studios do business. It is a constant ongoing topic of discussion about what Fallout 76 was a catastrophe and how they the PC police went and ruined Battlefield 5 and so on and so on and so on. But it is refreshing, and it should be extremely hopeful, certainly hopeful to me, to realize that the people who you think care nothing about politics are extraordinarily upset about this and determined to take their revenge on Blizzard in the only way that a consumer can. And I expect that moment is coming quickly.
At least one of their casters, as they call them, what we might term a broadcaster, has said that Hearthstone is a game in which people must make choices, sometimes to their own detriment, to do things that will hurt their own prospects in the game. And as a result, he's decided he's not going to participate as a caster for them as long as this kind of a decision stands.
Good for him.
Yes, and apparently Blizzard dumped the two guys who were doing the interview with Blitzchung.
Even better. Even better.
Is there a way, do you see a connection between this and what recently happened when the Houston Rockets general manager from the National Basketball Association in the United States made comments similar to Blitzchung, supporting on Twitter, supporting the Hong Kong Revolution or freedom for Hong Kong, and was immediately brushed back by the commissioner of the NBA, by the owner of the Houston Rockets, by James Harden, basketball player, and so many others?
Yes, not only do I see a connection, it's the exact same, precise same thing. A private citizen under the guise of a private citizen who is associated with a specific company made a pro-freedom statement, and a private business, either Blizzard or the National Basketball Association, immediately descended on them and cut them off at the knees in order to make sure that their Chinese overlords were not more upset than they already were, which is a separate issue, which I'd like to get into in a minute. But that's exactly the same issue. It's exactly the same issue. And I had a thought while you were asking this question, Scott, and my thought was, why is it that American companies like the NBA and Blizzard and all the rest of them, why are they so cavalier about throwing away the right to free speech? Why is this just such a non-issue for them? They instantly take the money, instantly side with the Red Chinese, and that's what they are, the Red Chinese, over their own fundamental core values, presumably.
Well, Blizzard says it's a violation of company policy to make the company look bad, essentially, to hurt the reputation of the company.
Sure, make the company look bad by saying that people should live free. I understand. No, I get it completely. I understand. I'm sure they have plenty of legal reasons, legal protections for doing this. I'm sure it's in the contract. As a matter of fact, I have no doubt whatsoever that I have signed documents in terms of agree on a box for user agreements that are 15 pages long. So I'm sure they're covered legally, but they're not covered morally. And the reason is, Scott, I've come to realize it while we were discussing it just now. The reason so many people are so willing to give up freedom of speech is because it hasn't cost them anything. It hasn't cost them anything. They didn't have to pay for it. They didn't have to pay for it, so it has no value to them. That's why this entire society, at least the left wing of the society, is so willing to give this absolutely fundamental, precious freedom away, is because it hasn't cost them anything. And so, since it costs them nothing, that's what they value it as.
I wonder, Bill, if the very fact that it is now costing somebody something, for example, Chung Eng-wai is paying a price for this, at least $10,000 and a year-long ban, during which he probably would have won a couple of other tournaments and made some more money, that the people at Blizzard and the people at Tencent Holdings and the people in the Chinese government may have just doomed themselves by cracking down too hard on a guy that if they had ignored him, nobody would have thought a thing of it.
Now we're down to brass tacks. Let me just say that there seems to be a bit of a difference between what the game player did versus what the casters did, because this game player was kind of an ex post facto thing. He probably didn't realize the full extent of what the consequences of that tweet would be. But nevertheless,
this wasn't a tweet. This was a video broadcast where he's wearing dark goggles and a gas mask. And the casters seemed to be playing along with him, like they were giggling. Now, they were speaking in Chinese of some sort, so I didn't know what they were saying. But clearly they were playing along with him.
No, you made that clear. I'm sorry. I just so used to reacting to tweets now it's almost like a reflex for me. No, I don't know if he realized the trouble he would get in. I suppose the fact that he's wearing a gas mask gave me some indication that he did. So if this guy understood that he was either at physical or financial risk, then that makes him a heroic person in my view. And I mean, and I don't mean any disrespect out of this, a kind of a low-grade heroism, the kind of heroism that's kind of expected of people, that you would stand up to your principles before you would abandon them for a paycheck, whatever they may be. So we live in an age now where just a simple standing up for your fundamental core freedoms is a strange act of heroism, and that's the world we live in. But the much bigger issue is the reaction of China and the reaction of the companies that are kissing China's butt.
It struck me, Bill, that as I saw the video, now again, I don't speak Chinese, I don't understand what they were saying, but it seemed to me to be almost sort of a giggling prankster who probably knew what he was saying was verboten, as they say in another language.
Same language, by the way.
Yeah, they turned this sort of giggling young prankster into a martyr.
They did. And by the way, again, just to keep perspective on things, which is another thing we try to do on this show, to the degree that he's a martyr, he's a martyr that got off pretty lucky. The guy standing in front of a tank 20 years ago or 30 or whatever it is now, that guy, and those people are actual martyrs who paid for their freedom of speech with their lives. But the two things I think are most important to come away from this story with are these. Number one, companies that are willing to give up their belief in freedom of speech in order to appease a paranoid lunatic government are a bunch of craven, miserable, low-life bastards who have no business living in a free society. None. If the NBA is willing to sell out not just the coach, but sell out the entire idea of freedom of speech, which is so closely coupled with capitalism, you can't separate the two. They're both freedom of actions. And so what they're basically saying in the case of the NBA and Blizzard is the entire system that has allowed us to make so much money off of this, including money from the Chinese, is worth nothing to us, so long as the dollars or the yen keep flowing. So that's number one. The second thing is that like most Americans, I have had a constant sort of rising anxiety about the growing power of China. And having watched what happened with the NBA, having watched the Chinese government pull down posters that on the side of buildings that are 7-8 stories tall, pictures of basketball players, all of them coming down because one American coach tweeted one thing, and that's when I realized what been lurking in the bottom of my mind and hadn't fully crystallized yet. And that's simply this. To the degree that I used to worry about the Chinese, those days are over. I don't worry about them at all. I don't fear them. They don't concern me. Not in the slightest. A government that is that paranoid, that insecure, and a society that is that willing to go to those lengths to make sure that no other thoughts are ever presented, that government doesn't scare me in the slightest. The idea that Americans might that we might simply just abandon everything we believe in to make these people happy, that they think that that's actually going to work, that China is so insecure that one coach making one tweet, not that it matters, is grounds to completely divorce the entire deal. If that's what you've got, China, that's it. Then not only am I not worried about you economically, I'm not worried about you militarily either. If China has created the kind of society where one person making one tweet about one thing about freedom means the entire deal with the NBA, $500 million is off because they're that insecure. If you actually think that a commander of a Chinese destroyer is going to show any kind of initiative coming from a culture like that, you're out of your mind. We are going to wipe these people clean in terms of economic contests, because everything in the electronic age, especially things like gaming, is based on ideas, based on freedom of thought. And as we enter deeper into a third wave information-based economy, it's not a question of whether or not we have armies and armies and armies of loyal workers pulling wrenches and pushing levers. It's going to come down to who's got the best ideas. And to suspect that a country like this, a country like China, which is this mortified about one single idea from one single person on the other side of the planet, to think that those people are going to generate the ideas that are going to drive this economy in the so-called Chinese century, it's a laughing stock. It's a laughing stock. 20th century was the American century. 21st century is going to be the American century too. If you had your doubts about it, this is all you need to know. When China is ready to make fun of itself, when China is ready to put up with the kind of abuse that we put up with, when the Chinese media goes after Chinese presidents the way that our media goes after our president, and the Chinese presidents don't do anything other than try and handle the damage, that's when I'll start worrying about China. Until then, they're a monolithic, cowardly, miserable, cruel, tyrannical dictatorship. And the fact that people can say the slightest thing about them and have them go tight as a clam is an indication of just how weak they really are.
Because we rely here not upon any Chinese conglomerates or major U.S. corporations, but simply upon the generosity of the individual members at BillWhittle.com, let me just add this thought. Liberate Hong Kong, the revolution of our time.
Damn right.
For Bill Whittle,
Damn
I'm
right.
Scott Ott.
Liberate Hong Kong, the revolution of our time. And if you don't like it, you can bug off.
I'm Scott Ott. Thanks for watching.